I'm joined here today by Carly Cass, who's waving to you right now. She and I are senior training associates with Indivisible, part of a 6-person now training team. And we represent and live in different parts of the country to support different areas. I'm in the West, Carly's in Chicago, so we're all over the place. And today we're going to cover these kind of 3 areas. I've already kind of introduced the topic. We're going to show you some best practices for creating an equitable online space, and then jump to tips and tricks, including technology, but also like how to create the best kind of agenda and how to use the time really well that you have for a meeting. But I just want to acknowledge kind of the elephant in the room, that this is a trying time for everyone. Who would have figured that we would be in a place like this with the coronavirus really changing the way we do things? I mean, we were already using technology a lot. We were already harnessing email and online petitions and even doing some getting out the vote. But now we're really having to focus to doing all of our work online. So thank you for your patience and for continuing to stay in the work, but also to give yourself kind of a break and knowing that some of this stuff is challenging and new to everyone. So take time to practice. Also recognize that you can't do everything, and that's okay. Like I've been reading that, people all across the gamut, your productivity level is just going to be a little less. It comes with the territory now, because you've got a lot of other things to focus on, but again, we really appreciate that you're here. So let's move forward. So with that said, I'm gonna just start here by kind of reiterating that everything doesn't have to be business right away. You might want to just use this online space to reconnect with people. Maybe it's been 4 or 6 weeks since you've seen anyone. I'm sure some of you are already using Zoom or Google Hangouts or have been on the phone with people, but I really recommend trying to just rebuild what you've already started, and use the time to check in with people and see how people are doing, see how they're managing this new kind of world, and help people sort of learn from each other. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carly to talk about creating an equitable online space.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks everyone for being here today. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks for inclusive spaces online. All right, and as Lori just said, it's okay to name that this is not the same. Something that I know some folks are struggling with is moving from offline to online. While there are lots of things we can do both online and offline in person, some things are not going to be able to be replicated, and that's okay. As Lori just pointed out, I think it was the New York Times that said people are going to be 30% less productive during this time. And so just naming that, and also acknowledging that technology is a tool. It's a tool that we sometimes cannot control, and that's okay. And that, as long as we work together and acknowledge that there are limitations to technology. Awesome. So go ahead and put in the chat box if you've seen this little picture before. I know it's been floating around the internet in different variations. Oh, great. Awesome. So some people have seen it. Before we talked about inclusion, I really wanted to name the difference between equality and equity. Sometimes it can be kind of fuzzy. So on the left, you have, I think they're apples. We're going to assume they're apples. Folks picking apples, and this is equality. Everyone has the same size box underneath their feet. As you can see, only one of the figures can reach the apple. On the right side, you have equity, where all 3 figures can reach the apples, but they have different number of boxes below their feet. Sometimes it's really easy to say, all right, one size fits all, we're just going to send out an email if you can't figure out how to use the Zoom, or if you can't make the call, we'll give you an updates later. In this time, folks have different needs. Maybe they've never used the internet before. Maybe they actually don't have broadband at their house. Having, accessible means is really important during this time. So that's the difference between equality and equity. So why is it important to focus on equitable spaces? Well, for one, if you've been to any of our recruitment trainings, you've heard me say this before. Folks come for the cause, but they stay for the community. Meaning, we want folks to feel welcome. We want them to feel as engaged as possible during the meeting. And that's the heart and soul of why we're here, right? We want to make sure that folks have access to the information. As I said before, technology is a tool. It can fail us. Folks have a lot going on. Maybe they have to miss the meeting due to childcare or, caring for a sick family member at this time. We want to make sure that they are able to get the information at a later time. We want to make sure everyone has a voice. A lot of folks are in the middle of planning, hopefully some voter contact, but we'll see how it goes in the next couple of months. And I know that a lot of groups do voting on issues and how plans are going to move forward. And so if someone has to miss a meeting, their vote then is missed. So making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And then lastly, as Indivisibles, we want to hold up our end of the bargain, and we want to continue to build and recruit folks into our movement, especially during this time when a lot of folks have extra time and are looking for something to do and get involved. We want to make sure that we're able to grab those people and meet their needs. So how to best plan for a meeting? Well, the first thing you should do, and Laura is going to talk about this in a little bit, is ask your folks. Send out a survey. Say, what needs do you have in order to come to our meeting, or how can we best set you up for success? Send a survey. Find out what the needs actually are. And then make sure the meeting is as accessible as possible. Accessible as possible. Meaning if you have a call-in number, have a video call as well. Or if you have a video call, have a call-in number as well for the folks that might not be able to join by video or vice versa. And record the meeting. This meeting is being recorded so that folks who missed it can watch the recording and get the information. We know it's not the same, but it does provide access to information. Some things to consider. Sending out your slides and your agenda beforehand, any information that you can. If you're gonna have a guest speaker, maybe sending some background information about why that speaker is coming or who they are. And then on the back end, sending the minutes, the recording, action items. I sit on a national board for reproductive rights organization, and we had a board meeting this past Sunday. And on Monday morning in my inbox, I got a one-pager of just top lines of what we voted on, what was talked about, and what next steps are. And for someone like me who works full time, who has a family, it was really helpful to get that recap. Have a contingency plan. If there's a storm and someone loses power, or if someone has to get off the call because there's a kid working virtual school, there's a husband or a wife working as well, and chaos is happening, have a contingency plan. And then again, acknowledge technology will fail. If you're in a smaller meeting, maybe 3 or 4 folks, we do this all the time at Indivisible, where someone's internet is lagging a little bit, so they freeze. We wait 2 minutes to see if they'll come back before moving on. We know that we're not going to be able to do that all of the time, but if we have the time and the grace, we should be able to do that. And then lastly, have a little grace, right? Everyone's dealing with a lot right now, whether it's anxiety, whether it's loved ones being unemployed, whether it's the unknown, maybe it's learning new technology, or learning how to use Zoom for the first time, or learning how to use Google Docs for the first time. Having some grace for your fellow group members, and as we all kind of go through this together, is really important. And just reminding one another that, hey, we're in this together, and we're going to get through it together. So I think I'm going to pass it back to you, Lori, to talk about some tips and tricks.
Okay, I need to unmute myself there. Okay. And go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to jump into the area of all the technology right now. And the things we're going to focus on to help you facilitate are how audio chat, text chat, cameras, collaborative document editing, and screen sharing are part of that mix. So we've got this checklist that was put together by some group leaders in Colorado and Arizona on facilitating an online space, and some things to consider and kind of check off as you become more familiar and before you have your meeting. So first of all is just to kind of recognize how you are seen and heard. If you're in a slightly noisy spot, you might want to use headphones with a microphone, or just kind of make sure that you're behind a closed door if possible. And also in regards to being seen, making sure there's not light coming right at you, because then you'll be shadowed. I have light coming from the side, and I've also raised my desk for this presentation, and so I had to fix the camera because it was right here before, and just kind of making sure that you're kind of like chest high and your face show so people can see you well enough. You know, if I back up, I might be too far away and you can't see me. Just kind of consider those things. And one thing in this, I put this in bold because it was the thing that I struggled with the most, was how to move back and forth between your online space, so Zoom, for example, or Google Hangouts, and then maybe PowerPoint or Google Slides, or maybe a Google document that you're showing. Be really familiar with that. And if you're not, you know, hit somebody up, or try finding a partner that can try this out with you, so you can figure out the best ways to do this before you get into a meeting where you're facilitating with a dozen or more people. And then here's a chunk of the checklist that kind of goes together about knowing your toolbar. So if you need to unmute other people or mute people who are in your meeting, as host, you have that ability to do that. And how to turn people's camera off and on, show them how to do that or do it for them. You can also view in two different ways, and you've probably already figured this out today. Hopefully you can see just me speaking, or you can go up to the top kind of right corner, and I think you can do this in your meeting today. If not, it's in the meeting feature and not the webinar feature. You can see the gallery view, which is kind of like the Brady Bunch view. And then you've got the chat box, which is a really powerful place that, especially if you've got everybody muted, this is where they can still participate. It's where you're typing questions today, perhaps where links will be put so that you can let your participants know about something, to look at something else. So just knowing how to manage all that stuff is really important. And in regards to the chat box, how are you going to do your chat box? Are you going to use like the question format we're doing today, typing the question and then the word question, then putting the question? Or maybe use a feature that we call stack, which comes from a bigger term called progressive stack, and we kind of modified that just to allow whoever wants to speak can speak. So we manage the list of people who stack, people who type the word stack into the chat box, and let's say 3 or 4 people type the word stack. Whoever typed the word in first gets to speak first and then second. It's just a way of managing who wants to speak. So those people would become unmuted and ask their question in order of how they were stacked. So one of the big questions everybody has is, should they be using Zoom or Google Hangout? We're using Zoom today because it can manage a large group of people, and we can actually manage the participants and their audio. But with a smaller group, Google Hangout might be the way you want to go. But what are the differences? So I put together this chart that sort of explains very briefly the comparisons between Zoom and Google Hangout. And you can see in most cases, they're pretty similar. Zoom, there is a fee, though you can still do a small meeting for 40 minutes with 3 people. One of the main features of Zoom is that you do have the audio controls for attendees. And both have call recordings, both do screen sharing. And you can do chat, so like group messaging. Closed captioning, Google Hangout actually has the advantage there. It's built right in, whereas with Zoom, you have to arrange with a third party to do your closed captioning, and then you can turn it on. So there's a fee to do that. Both Google Hangouts and Zoom have improved upon their security and privacy just based on the fact that they're both being used so heavily now. I'm not going to go into those details about what has been added and how their encryption has become stronger, but you can check out more information by checking out those links. And Zoom does polls, and so small surveys, and has a whiteboard feature as well, whereas Google Hangouts does not. So I also am going to just show you quickly, and I know this is going to be really fast, but you can always come back to the recording and look at it later. We've got an old screenshot here of a training that we did a couple weeks ago. And I just wanted to point out the different parts of the menu bar and some of the features. So here's your video and muting capabilities. And then you've got the button to manage your participants, and meaning you can also hear, if you're a host, you can promote someone else to host when you're in participants. Screen sharing is what I clicked on right now to share my screen. You can share the full screen, and if you want to only see part of the screen right now, if you hit escape on your keyboard, that's on a Mac, I'm not sure what it is on a PC, then you'll be able to see the rest of your computer as well and the screen at the same time. The chat window, we've already talked a lot about that. And over here on the right, there's a little button that lets you save the chat box to a text file. So at the end of the session, you can click on that and it'll just save the whole thing for you. Here's the record button, which Carly pressed on her computer, where she's saving an audio and video file for this webinar. And up here on the right, you've got the toggle between the speaker and gallery view, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And then when you're in the speaker, when you're a speaker and you're sharing your screen, you have some more options here. So here's the same kind of demo I'm going to give for the Google Hangout controls. Here's my fellow training team in a meeting last week. And there are less controls in Google Hangout, but still there's your video and audio stuff. And then here's where you turn on the captions. And the captions work really great. It's actually a really nice feature for people who would like to see a visual representation of what's being said, or anyone who's having that's a hearing issue. Over here are some more AV controls. And here's where you present now. It's just like sharing your screen on Zoom. And then up here at the top are the two toggles for turning on your participants on and off, and for turning the chat box on and off. And in this example, both of them are turned off. So Google also offers a couple of other tools within their suite of tools, which I want to just briefly show you one of them and then kind of just talk about the other one and mention it to you. So Google Slides is the equivalent of PowerPoint or Keynote, which you might be using otherwise. But the advantage here is that you can really collaborate with someone else at the same time, like you would on a Google Doc, for example. So I'm going to jump off this presentation for a second and jump into another one of some slides and give you just a taste of what it looks like. So this collaborative work was put together by Training for Change. You can Google them and go look at their website. They have a bunch of really great ideas for managing the work that we all do, especially how to do it online. So let me stop sharing this or presenting this and jump over to this screen here. Carly, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see facilitating online means? Great. Okay. So, like I said, this was developed by Training for Change, and I'm just going to show you. I've included here some of their tools for doing that, but I'm just going to show you the first two. So let's imagine that you've got a group of like 15 people with you in your meeting, and instead of just taking turns introducing yourself, what you could ask them to do is to double click on a slide like this and type in their name. So I'm going to type in my name, and let's imagine that someone named Mary is here, and imagine that someone named Scott is here. Okay, so I would ask each person to drag their tile over to the green circle, which represents a virtual table. And okay, Scott, let's get you picked up here. How come I can't move Scott? All right, there we go. Okay, so let's imagine the circle is a clock. What I'm going to do is ask everybody to go around the clock, around the circle, and introduce themselves. So I'm closest to noon, which I'm at like about 3 o'clock. So hi, my name is Lori. I live in Corte Madera, California. Let's go to Scott next, because he's at 6 o'clock, and he would say, hi, my name is Scott. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And then Mary is last here, but she's at close to 9 o'clock. And hi, my name is Mary. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. So just another way to engage people instead of just having, the straight on just call and answer and voices that we're typically used to. So maybe this is a way that you want to do something like that. So another way, and this is a model of, I come from teaching in a high school for a long time, and we did a lot of design thinking and sticky note thinking with students. So here's another way to do a collaborative exercise. So name 1 or 2 things that you're doing to keep yourself grounded during this challenging time. I'm just reading the prompt up here. And 2 things that I did this before coming here. So as Lori, I typed in gardening and walking every day. Maybe Scott is TV binging and cooking. And Mary is calling an old friend each day. So maybe like a new friend each day. And she is also gardening. So you could talk about, what are some things that we're doing in common? What are some things that, oh, wow, I want to try to do that. So this would be a way to just get people talking, to, build up your community and do something that's a little different than just the call and answer that you would normally do in a video call or a phone call. So I'm just going to briefly show you these other slides. And show you that you can work like on a grid. So maybe you want to try something along these lines. Here's another slide that just does the sticky notes again. And here's something you could do at the end of a meeting, pull everybody back to the table and go around the circle about, what's one thing you want to do before your next online meeting, or you could switch up this question to anything. All of these slides are editable, so you could change this question. You could type in something else. I just ask, and this will be included in the email we send you. So, just go ahead and use it, but make a copy of the whole stack. And you just do File, make a copy of the entire presentation, and name it your own thing, and then it's yours forever. And then someone else can use the same document. And then lastly, there's this other model to help sort of gauge, how are things going on the scale from 1 to 5. So how did you feel about the length of this training? You could put your name there and then put your tile, the little gray tile, near 1 or 5, depending on how you thought the meeting went. So yeah, so this is what I hope will be something that'll be useful. I'm happy to answer questions about how to use it best, or even come to your meeting the first time if you want to use it, and let me help you facilitate that. Certainly open to finding ways to make it useful. So with that said, I'm going to go back to our main presentation and talk a little bit about Google Slides. I'm sorry, Google Forms. We were just talking about Google Slides. So Google Forms, or as some people call them, Google Surveys. Forms are a way to do a poll or do a questionnaire that you might not, I mean, you can still use Zoom to do small polls, but if you really have a lot of survey questions you'd like to ask your group, I would really recommend using Google Forms. So before you have a meeting, or before you go to this kind of meeting in online form, if you're meeting weekly or even monthly, what kinds of things could you ask your membership ahead of time so that you want to get the best information possible before you have your meeting? Why don't you add those ideas in the chat box and let's see what people think. Yeah, exactly. So you want to know, like, do people want to meet in the morning or the afternoon or evening? Is weekend better? Is weekday better? What topics do they want to talk about? Exactly, like what issues are most important to them? You might ask them who has an interesting topic they want to bring to the meeting, and they could be a featured speaker or a guest on during your meeting. Yeah, those are all great ideas. So here's an example survey that I made that you could send out about future meetings, and I will make this available to you in the email follow-up. So survey data can be really useful in helping you plan. And the cool thing about surveys like this in Google is they come with a spreadsheet that helps you sort your data, kind of analyze your data, especially if you've had like 100 responses. It's really great to see it all in columns, and it's just like any other spreadsheet. You can reorganize the data, highlight it, take pieces out, and see what is most useful to you. Now, Google free options. Yeah, some people are just like, I don't want to use Google. I don't have a Gmail account. I'd rather use something else. Here are some other suggestions. Training for Change suggests this riseup.net, which has a few different tools. I haven't used them much myself, so I can't really give you much information about them, but I have used Padlet.com a lot of times. I used it a lot when I was working as a high school teacher. It's a great way to do kind of a sticky note thing, like one page at a time. So if you have a question, people type their answers, you can add images, like photos and things, and it's actually really easy to ramp up and use. And then there's SurveyMonkey for surveys, if you'd rather not use Google Surveys or Google Forms. SurveyMonkey is very similar. I don't know if there's really any difference to it. It's just not Google. So it's actually just as useful. All right, so I'm going to switch out of my tech mode here and hand it back to Carly for before the meeting prep work. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Lori. So we've talked a lot today about different tools, how to be inclusive, but let's walk you through before the meeting and then to an agenda. So some prep work to do before your meeting. As I said earlier, send out a survey. As Lori said, you can do it via Google Form or Google Survey or SurveyMonkey. Find out what your folks need. Find out what is going to be most productive for them. Set a meeting goal. As Lori asked before we got started today, what were your goals for this meeting? You want to make sure that you set your meeting goals before the meeting. That may craft what technology you use. If you're having a meeting with, 15 people and there's a presenter, maybe you'll use Zoom. If there's 3 people coming and it's a committee meeting and you just need to talk really quickly, maybe Google Hangouts is a better option for you. Take some time. Let me know, actually, because I know some groups do this. They have group norms for their meetings. So yeah, exactly. All right, so some groups do this. Take some time to set up online norms. As Lori mentioned, we use a tool called Stack, where you can type in the chat box Stack, and then that's the next person in line. And it's almost like a raising of the hand type of system. Something that we use at Indivisible is the plus or minus method. Let's say you don't really need to get an exact vote, but want to gauge people's interest. You can put ++ in the chat box for agree or -— for disagree. So are y'all liking this webinar today? Awesome. So lots of ++s. Thank you. That was a little nerve-wracking. And then, yeah, so if there's a question that folks disagree, then they'll put -. All of you are on automatic mute. We know, as I've mentioned earlier, as we're all living in this new world, that sometimes we have kids doing virtual school, spouses working, dogs snoring, all types of noises and background noises. So if you're not speaking, to allow for folks to hear, make a rule that everyone's on mute. And lastly, and we did this today, pledge to limit your distractions. Our phones are blowing up with notifications constantly, and there's things happening out the window. A bird just hit my window, which is why I said that while Lauren was speaking. But try and limit your distractions so that folks can really focus on the meeting itself. Awesome. So assign roles before the meeting. Something we did today is actually we had a pre-webinar meeting where everyone who was helping out, our moderators, myself and Lori, the presenters, met. And we assigned roles and we walked through it and made sure everyone knew what they were doing so that we could have a successful, seamless webinar. Some example roles are chat monitor. So Raquel's been answering all your questions and grabbing them for later, or a tech lead. Speakers. If you have an outside facilitator coming in, make sure they know what time they're supposed to be there, what they're speaking on, how they should unmute, all that stuff. If you're having speakers, maybe committee updates, bring them into that pre-meeting and have them know, okay, I'm speaking at this point and I will be unmuted by this person. Have a note taker. I talked about earlier sending out meeting minutes. Make sure that there's someone taking down notes and taking down what's happening if you're not recording the meeting, and honestly, even if you are recording the meeting. And then a follow-up lead. So after tonight's webinar, you will receive an email from our training team email, which all your materials. That's my job, that's my responsibility. I know that going into today's training. Make sure that someone knows going into the meeting that their job after the meeting, maybe the day before or day after the meeting, they have to send out all of that information. Awesome, so let's do a sample agenda. A quick note, try not to have more than 3 agenda items for your meeting. We know we're going to be less productive during this time. It's so much harder to focus when there's so many distractions. So don't overwhelm your group, don't overwhelm yourself, just have 3 agenda items. Also try and keep the meeting between an hour and an hour and a half. When you're in person, it's really easy to take a 15-minute break, or if there's a coffee shop nearby, take a lunch break or whatnot. You can't do that so easily online. So keeping the meeting shorter helps with that kind of meeting fatigue, as we call it. All right, so this is our sample meeting. The meeting goals are to build community. We're going to have a guest speaker come and talk about vote by mail, and we're going to give committee updates. Those are my 3 goals for the meeting. I know that there's going to be 25 people at my meeting, so I'm going to use Zoom webinar because I don't want anyone talking while we have our guest speaker talking. So I'm going to do my welcome as Lori did earlier today. Welcome folks to the meeting. If you notice, we didn't start right on time. We waited a minute or 2 as folks kind of trickled in. You know, again, we need to give folks grace. We want to make sure that people can sign on if the internet's slow or if they get the call-in number wrong, whatever it is. So give folks some grace, start a minute or 2 late. Review your agenda. Talk about what you're going to accomplish today. Also, review your follow-up procedure and your technology plan. Let folks know, hey, if you got to run, that's cool. We'll send you all the information. Or if your internet goes out, don't worry, this is our plan. Have an icebreaker. So we used the chat box today to ask folks what their goals were, and that was kind of our icebreaker. You can use that. You can put folks into a breakout room, ask them a question, have them all talk. My favorite is having someone do a fun activity. So maybe the organizer stretch, or I know our movement's made up of folks who are really musically talented. Someone can play the trumpet for a few minutes, whatever, you know, just fun icebreaker, welcome to the meeting, making it interesting and making folks excited to be there. Then you want to get to your meat of the meeting. Now this is where, in my meeting, we're going to have our guest speaker. Let's say you're going to have action items. Maybe you're doing a Google form to vote, or you're using the Google interactive Google Slides, as Lori showed you earlier. Want to keep this to a maximum of half an hour. Folks don't have a lot of attention span, and sitting in front of a computer screen is really hard sometimes. So making sure that 30 minutes max is your sweet spot. Then having a second icebreaker. Maybe it's a question in the chat box, maybe it's a breakout room, a physical activity. Something I really like that a couple Indivisible groups are doing are highlighting a member. If there's someone who is doing really great work outside of their Indivisible group, or has a really cool hobby or whatnot, sharing that. You know, we don't get to be with each other physically, and so we don't get that community time to just talk. This is a great way to show people's strengths and what they're interested in. And then you'll notice that the updates and announcements are actually at the end of the meeting. A lot of times in an in-person meeting, those are in the beginning because people will leave towards the end. You want to flip it. Updates and announcements can honestly be sent in an email. So if your meeting is running really long, or if you had a speaker who went over that 30 minutes, saying, all right, you know what, we're going to send our updates in an email afterwards, look out for it. It helps everyone out, and you also get it in writing. And then you want to close your meeting, maybe have some optional social time. I know Arizona, and I think Colorado is doing this as well. They're doing Takeout Tuesday to support local businesses. So they're having their meetings and then going and getting takeout and eating dinner together, which I just think is really cute. And then again, your post follow-up, your post-meeting follow-up, excuse me. So that's that email, that's, you know, the recording, the slides, all that information is sent out the very next day. All right, so some final thoughts and reflections. Y'all, there are so many tools for us to use on the internet. Google, not Google, whatever it is. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. Experiment, take some time, learn them. Ask Lori, she's really great at them. She's taught me a lot. Take the time to be inclusive and equitable within your meeting, especially now. And then also set yourself up for success. Plan your meeting accordingly with the steps we laid out today. All right, y'all, unfortunately, we're really short on time. So what we're going to do is, rather than answer some questions now, Raquel has all of the questions written down. Lori and I are going to jump in and answer them in the document and send it out in a PDF. But we are going to host an office hour in case you try and use the collab slides and you can't quite figure it out, or do have a question that pops up into your head after. And that's going to be next Thursday, the 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern. And you can register at that link. So thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know it's always fun to do these trainings, and we'll see you next time.